The mask behind the music. Frank Sinatra wasn't just a crooner. He was connected. And not just connected to Hollywood producers or Capitol Records executives. He had deeper ties, shadowy ones, whispers that trailed him from backroom lounges in Hoboken to high-roller suites in Las Vegas. Ties that couldn't be seen in the spotlight, but were always felt in the silence behind it. His voice could make grown men cry. His charm could melt cold rooms. But behind old blue eyes was a trail of rumors, FBI files, and mob bosses who didn't just enjoy his music, they invested in him. Some say they made him. Others say he made himself, with a little help from the underworld. The deeper you go into Sinatra's life, the murkier it becomes. Friendships with known gangsters, secret meetings, presidential connections, and a nightclub deal that brought it all crashing down. This isn't just a story about a singer. It's a story about how the American dream can come with a devil's handshake and how one man became the face of both glamour and danger in the golden age of Hollywood. Before the mob, before the fame, before the scandals, there was a skinny kid from Hoboken with a busted eardrum and a dream. Frank Sinatra was born in 1915 in Hoboken, New Jersey. His birth was traumatic, so much so that he was reportedly pulled out with forceps, leaving a permanent scar on the side of his face and a ruptured eardrum that would get him rejected from military service years later. But that didn't stop him. Raised by a strong-willed mother who dabbled in local politics and illegal abortions, Sinatra grew up tough. He was streetwise, confident, and already understood how power worked, especially behind closed doors. His father boxed under the name Marty O'Brien, and both parents were known in local circles. Sinatra absorbed this atmosphere of backroom deals and street loyalty early. He fell in love with music fast, watching Bing Crosby on stage, listening to crooners on the radio. But Frank didn't just want to sing, he wanted to own the stage. And he worked at it relentlessly. By the late 1930s, he was singing with the Harry James Orchestra and then with Tommy Dorsey, two of the biggest big band leaders of the time. But even that came with shadows. Dorsey later claimed Sinatra had help getting out of his exclusive contract. Rumors swirled that mob figures persuaded Dorsey to let Sinatra go by putting a gun to his head and forcing him to sign. Whether that happened or not, one thing was clear. Sinatra was on the rise, and nothing, not even the most powerful band leader in the country, was going to stand in his way. Sinatra's story has always had a touch of myth to it. But when it comes to his early days, the rumors aren't all smoke. Back in Hoboken, Sinatra didn't just run with musicians. He also brushed shoulders with the kind of men who ran numbers, collected debts, and didn't ask twice. Among them was Willie Moretti, a feared and respected lieutenant in the Genovese crime family. Moretti wasn't just a local thug. He had real power, and he liked Sinatra. It's been said that Moretti was the one who got Sinatra out of his Tommy Dorsey contract, using methods far outside any legal negotiation. In fact, when Dorsey was asked years later how he let Sinatra walk away from such a lucrative deal, he supposedly replied, "I was visited by a few friends who made me an offer I couldn't refuse." The line may sound cinematic, but in those days, it was deadly real. Moretti also helped Sinatra get booked at top venues, using intimidation where charm didn't work. He'd call club owners, lean on promoters, and even threaten radio DJs who didn't give Sinatra airtime. And it worked. By the early 40s, Sinatra wasn't just rising, he was rocketing. Screaming fans lined up for blocks, and The Voice became a national obsession. But fame comes at a price, and the bill was coming due. The 1950s brought a new chapter for Sinatra, Las Vegas. At first glance, Vegas seemed like a natural fit. It was glamorous, exclusive, and crawling with celebrities. But beneath the neon lights was something darker. The casinos weren't run by businessmen, they were controlled by the mob. Sinatra was a key part of Vegas's transformation from desert outpost to entertainment capital. His performances at the Sands Hotel became legendary, drawing in crowds night after night. But what most didn't know was who really ran the Sands. a group of powerful mobsters, including Sam Giancana, Johnny Roselli, and others connected to the Chicago outfit. Sinatra didn't just perform, he mingled, drank, and struck up personal friendships with men like Giancana. To outsiders, it looked like a celebrity embracing powerful fans. To the FBI, it looked like something more dangerous. In 1960, Sinatra invested in the Cal Neva Lodge, a swanky casino resort on the California-Nevada border. Officially, he was the face of the property. Behind the scenes, Giancana was calling the shots. This was more than friendship. It was business. And business with the mob never stays quiet. Surveillance picked up meetings between Giancana and Sinatra at Cal Neva. FBI informants claimed the resort hosted everything from underworld summits to celebrity blackmail plots. Sinatra, knowingly or not, was at the heart of it all. While Vegas was the mob's casino, Hollywood was their stage, and Sinatra was their leading man. In the late 50s and early 60s, the Rat Pack ruled entertainment. Frank, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, they were the kings of cool. But even the Rat Pack had secrets. Dean Martin had long-standing ties to mob figures going back to his nightclub days. Sammy Davis Jr. was closely watched by Hoover's FBI because of his activism and his associations. Lawford, meanwhile, had access to the most powerful man in the world, President John F. Kennedy. Sinatra introduced JFK to the pack. He also introduced JFK to some unsavory characters. Among them was Judith Campbell Exner, a glamorous socialite who later admitted to being involved with both JFK and Sam Giancana at the same time. According to her, she acted as a messenger between the two, often at Sinatra's request. Sinatra's Palm Springs compound became a nexus for secret meetings. Politicians, mobsters, entertainers, they all passed through and not all left clean. Sinatra believed he was a kingmaker, but the reality was more complicated. He was entangling the presidency with the criminal underworld, and when the tide shifted, he found himself isolated and expendable. By the early 1960s, Sinatra had evolved from mere celebrity to power broker. He wasn't just attending political galas, he was shaping them. One of his biggest ambitions? Helping John F. Kennedy secure the presidency. Sinatra's support for JFK was no secret. He performed at campaign rallies, hosted fundraising events, and lent his charm and voice to the Democratic cause. But behind the scenes, there were less public maneuvers in play, ones that would later haunt him. It all came down to Judith Campbell Exner. She was a glamorous brunette, often seen on the arms of powerful men. But what made her story so volatile was her role as a bridge between two towering figures, JFK and Sam Giancana. And according to Exner herself, Sinatra introduced her to both. FBI files would later suggest that Exner passed messages, some even say envelopes, between the future president and the mob boss. Whether these were love letters or backroom deals has never been confirmed, but the implication was clear. Sinatra was the conduit. The plot thickened when President Kennedy planned a West Coast visit. Sinatra prepared his Palm Springs estate for the president's stay, installed a helipad, remodeled guest rooms, hired extra staff. But at the last minute, JFK changed his plans and stayed at Bing Crosby's house instead. The reason? Robert F. Kennedy, now Attorney General, was cracking down hard on organized crime, and Sinatra's known mob ties made him radioactive. The snub devastated Sinatra. He reportedly smashed furniture, cursed the Kennedys, and never forgave Peter Lawford, who delivered the news. For a man who had bet his influence on the Kennedy connection, the rejection was personal and costly. J. Edgar Hoover didn't just dislike Sinatra. He watched him like a hawk. The FBI began compiling a file on Sinatra as early as the 1940s. By the time it was declassified decades later, it stretched over 1,300 pages. These documents included everything from reports on his temper and alleged communist sympathies to far more dangerous connections, his ties to the mafia. Hoover's agents documented sightings of Sinatra with mobsters like Giancana, Roselli, Carlo Gambino, and others. They tapped phones, tailed cars, and even placed bugs in hotel rooms. One file recounted a 1960 meeting between Sinatra and Giancana in Miami, shortly before JFK's election. Another noted how Sinatra had flown Giancana to the Cal Neva Lodge using his private plane, an act that would later cost him dearly. Sinatra, of course, denied all wrongdoing. He insisted he was merely friendly with everyone and never involved in criminal activity. But the FBI didn't see it that way. And they weren't alone. The Nevada Gaming Control Board began investigating the Cal Neva Lodge. Sinatra's casino license was under review, and after agents confirmed Giancana had been on the premises, something strictly prohibited, Sinatra was forced to surrender his license. The media had a field day. The fall from grace was brutal. Sinatra, once the golden boy of Vegas and the face of class and charm, was now smeared by headlines linking him to the mafia. Cal Neva Lodge was supposed to be Sinatra's crown jewel, a private escape where celebrities, politicians, and elite gamblers could mingle away from the public eye. Instead, it became ground zero for one of the biggest scandals of his life. Nestled on the serene edge of Lake Tahoe, the resort offered everything: luxury suites, a nightclub, even underground tunnels connecting the lodge to the cabins. It was designed for secrecy, ideal for high-profile guests who didn't want to be seen or overheard. But that secrecy raised alarms. Reports claimed that the tunnels were used for more than discretion. Some said they were routes for mob meetings, illicit affairs, and blackmail setups. Whether or not all of that was true, it didn't help that Sam Giancana, then one of the FBI's top targets, had been spotted multiple times on the premises. Under Nevada law, known mobsters were barred from entering casinos. Sinatra's decision to host Giancana wasn't just a lapse in judgment, it was a violation, and the state took it seriously. In 1963, the Nevada Gaming Commission stripped Sinatra of his casino license. He was humiliated, enraged, and forced to sell his stake in the property. What was meant to be a playground of power had become a legal disaster. Even worse, the fallout didn't end with the sale. The scandal cemented a public perception that Sinatra wasn't just brushing shoulders with criminals, he was in business with them. For years afterward, every move he made was second-guessed. Every new venture was scrutinized. And though he tried to bounce back, the stain of Cal Neva never fully washed away. Frank Sinatra had no shortage of opportunities to clear his name. He could have sat down for interviews. He could have written a tell-all. He could have distanced himself from the mob, played the victim, and walked away with public sympathy. But he never did. Instead, he stayed silent. And that silence spoke volumes. To some, it was a sign of old-school loyalty. The kind of loyalty you don't buy, you earn. Sinatra had come up in a world where favors weren't forgotten, and debts weren't ignored. Men like Willie Moretti and Sam Giancana had allegedly helped him when his star was still flickering, not yet blazing. In return, he gave them access, association, and the kind of protection only celebrity could offer. Others believe it wasn't loyalty at all, but fear. The mob didn't just reward, it punished. And Sinatra, for all his swagger, may have known he was one wrong word away from becoming a cautionary tale. There were always whispers that the underworld had things on him. Proof of affairs, financial records, phone calls, letters, and photos that could tarnish him beyond repair. Blackmail, some say, was an insurance policy. Even friends noticed how quickly he changed the subject when certain names came up. Former associates recalled how Sinatra would suddenly go quiet, glance around, and steer the conversation elsewhere when someone mentioned Giancana, Roselli, or Exner. It wasn't paranoia, it was precision. And then there were the phone calls. Rumors spread that Sinatra would receive late-night calls from unknown men with coded instructions, that he would vanish for hours or even days and reappear without explanation. Some speculated he acted as a liaison between Hollywood and the mob long after his Cal Neva days were over. But no one could ever prove it. Sinatra took the old code of silence, omerta, seriously. Maybe because it was ingrained. Maybe because it was survival. But either way, he kept his mouth shut to the grave. For a man who had once ruled both the music charts and the silver screen, the fall was steep and painfully public. By the late 1960s, Sinatra's reputation was in tatters among Hollywood insiders. Studios became wary of casting him. Brands steered clear of endorsements. Network executives, once eager to land a Sinatra special, suddenly returned his calls with hesitation or not at all. The phrase, "mob connected," now trailed him like cigarette smoke, clinging to every deal, every headline, every whisper in a backlot boardroom. Even his fans began to split. Some stood by him, seeing the accusations as media hit jobs or political retribution for his influence. Others, especially in the post-JFK era, saw him as a relic of a darker system, a man whose charm was a mask for corruption. His album sales dipped. Tours that once sold out in hours now saw empty seats. For the first time in decades, Sinatra was forced to hustle, not for money, but for credibility. He tried to reinvent himself. He focused more on live performances, where his stage presence could still melt a room. He took on dramatic film roles, The Detective, Tony Rome, and others, that portrayed him as gritty, flawed, and vulnerable. It was a shift in tone meant to reflect a matured artist, but critics were mixed, and the shadow of the mob loomed too large to ignore. Worse still, his longtime political connections began to evaporate. The Kennedy dynasty, once a source of pride for Sinatra, now avoided him. Bobby Kennedy made clear that any further association was off limits. Politicians from both sides of the aisle distanced themselves, wary of photo ops that could cost them credibility. It wasn't just business, it was isolation. Inside, Sinatra reportedly grew bitter. He felt betrayed by a system that had once adored him. Friends said he would replay conversations in his head, relive moments where things went wrong, and spiral into fits of rage. He still performed, still recorded, but something had changed. The sparkle was dimmer, the edge was sharper, and the myth of invincibility was gone. Frank Sinatra's legacy remains one of the most paradoxical in entertainment history. On one hand, he's still idolized. His voice continues to echo through hotel lobbies, airport lounges, and holiday playlists. Generations born long after his prime still recognize the suit, the fedora, the snap of his fingers as "Fly Me to the Moon" kicks in. For many, he is the sound of classic American sophistication. He won Grammys. He starred in over 60 films. He was a cultural force who helped define 20th century cool. But on the other hand, his story is laced with darkness. Allegations that were never proven, friendships that were never explained, and a lifetime of dodging questions that were never answered. His FBI file remains one of the largest ever assembled on a single entertainer. That fact alone says something. What do you do with a man like Sinatra? Do you write off the rumors as circumstantial and celebrate the artist? Or do you examine the full truth, however uncomfortable, and recognize that greatness and guilt can live side by side? Some say his mob ties were exaggerated. Others say they were just the tip of the iceberg. We may never know the full truth. Sinatra made sure of that. Even decades after his death, documentaries still dig into his life. Biographers chase down cold leads, and conspiracy theorists pore over every handshake, every guest list, every flight log. In death, as in life, Sinatra remains elusive, larger than life but never fully grasped. Frank Sinatra sang with the soul of a poet, moved with the grace of a dancer, and commanded rooms like a general. But behind that velvet voice was a man who learned early that fame, like favor, is never free. He came from nothing and ended up with everything: money, fame, power, women, presidents on speed dial. But in chasing it all, He made choices that tethered him to forces far bigger and far more dangerous than any stage or screen. The mob didn't just sit in his audience, they were part of the act. And whether Sinatra was a willing player or a cornered pawn, we may never know. What we do know is this: he played the game longer and better than almost anyone else. But every game has its cost. And while Sinatra may have never paid publicly, the scars were there. In his relationships, his career, and perhaps most hauntingly, in his silence. He once said, "I'm for anything that gets you through the night, be it prayer, tranquilizers, or a bottle of Jack." Maybe, in the end, it was secrecy that got him through. Because when you dance with devils in Hollywood's golden age, the music doesn't stop when the curtain drops. Sometimes it follows you into legend,